Good morning, neighbors. A little tough focusing on a subject because could go into the ignorance of politics and sharpening bullets, but hey, some people like to sharpen bullets. Anyway, this is about spectrum, with a capital S, because the word, like evolution, has so many different ways to use it. Contexts, paradigms, perspectives to point that thing at. So, to my mind, evolution is a change over time. That's as hard as that word is, change over time. So, my 4 decades of working with computers and people, probably in that order because I'm more comfortable with computers. So, words are interesting. Don't let people own them. A biologist can own his meaning of the word evolution, but he doesn't own the word. She, them, they, it. So, have confidence in your understanding of the word. And if a biologist is talking about evolution, you know the context he's talking about. If an engineer is talking about the evolution of conveyor systems, then he probably knows what he's talking about. Maybe. Well, you got to listen to the evolutionary story of how we went from chains to wires to GPS, right? That's part of the evolutionary tale, the engineering improvements we've done to things. So this is about spectrum. Spectrum's a really cool word, really interesting word, depending on where it's applied. When I use spectrum, there is an, what is it? I know I'm going to say it wrong, so it'll offend somebody, but it's been changed, but it's autism or autism spectrum disorders or whatever. So you can put psychological things, right? There's a spectrum of love, really intangible, but you get the idea, right? Love isn't this hard thing. It's a bunch of things. It's a soft, touchy-feely thing. So, why spectrums? I talk a lot about spectrum analysis in sciences, the physics of it, the detectors, how we detect, what we detect. Maybe I don't talk enough about it, but that's kind of what I'm speaking to as measurements. So, spectrum. If you go Google, and I hope you do, optical spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum, alpha particle spectrum, or high energy spectrum, covers many different particles, types of particles. So, spectrum analysis, you have to clearly state the spectrum you're talking about, because the instrument works off of that knowledge. Optical emission is specifically photon measurements. A photon is a discrete particle all by itself. It stands on its own, period. No matter where it is, it's a photon until it gets changed or is absorbed. Because as a photon, it's energy, looking for some place to energy, to relax, take a vacation, self-isolate. So this spectrum thing is, you can, there's some going on all around you, is hugely important to understand what they're talking about. So you can casually smear the electromagnetic spectrum with the optical spectrum, but you are talking about an electromagnetic detector does not see light. It may sense or react to light depending on the detector, but it is designed, it is known very well about how it works with electromagnetism. Microphone is one of the best examples people are familiar with. That is an electromagnetic device, purely. There is no photons, no light involved in that microphone, unless you looked really close. But that's another story. So just that microphone, look at the microphone. Unless there's static electricity around, that's usually the popping. You got a bad cable. The microphone, just turn the lights on, the microphone doesn't care. Does it? Or does it? Go get a flashlight, point it at your microphone. It doesn't care. So this is how specific these spectrum measurements are. And yes, you can confuse them, conflate them, because if I do see electrons moving, there may be photons. There may be photon particles emitted from electron movement. From any normal electron movement we think of, from an Earth perspective, there's no alpha, there's no beta, there's no gamma particles involved in the conversation. There could be, infinitesimal, because I don't accept absolutes. I'm a rather, we don't know kind of guy. But I'll take you to the edge of where we do know, maybe. So spectrums. Spectrums are a big thing, a big word. Easy to smear, easy to turn into woo. There is a frequency spectrum that we are capable of measuring. The spectrum goes from 0 hertz, which is DC, right? No waveforms, just a flat line. That's DC. To a waveform, which is AC as we typically think about it. And I can make that more complicated, but flow with the wave right now. Ride this one. We'll talk about pulses some other time. So the spectrum concept is important to keep in mind when speakers are talking. And if they do start to smear them, you begin to trust, then verify. Your verify portion of your situational awareness might be a little weak. Now, spectrums have a range. This is the hardest part to think of. The photons I spoke about don't exist that we know at 0 frequency. At a DC, photons don't have a rest state. They don't have a phase change to freeze or to turn into a gas. They just are there as energy, which is hard to keep separated. Also, so they don't have 0 frequency, which would be a DC voltage, some type of discrete potential because relativity. So on the top side of that, frequencies do not go to infinity. Now that's hard because infinity doesn't, infinity is just out there. So as we know, frequencies extend as far as we know how to measure them right now. And the frequency of a photon ends somewhere way up there in the AC world. The distance between those peaks, very fast ones versus slow, the waves you see, are all piece of a huge puzzle. So there was spectrum, not well presented, but is a concept idea maybe? You see, a spectrum doesn't go from 0, well, it can go from 0 to 100, right? Or it can go from 0 to infinity, depending on the scale you try to put in there. And when you get to the ends, the boundaries of those scales, we simply are still trying to figure it out. So there's 10 minutes of a spectrum. You know, I'm going to post this without watching it because it's just, I'm a wild man.